Welcome to After Hour Mysteries. In today's video, we are going to dive deep into the Nazi base hidden deep beneath Antarctica Glacier. Beneath layers of ancient ice lies evidence of Hitler's most ambitious and terrifying project, a facility constructed during the darkest days of World War II. What you're about to hear isn't just another conspiracy theory, but a haunting tale of forbidden technology, ancient discoveries, and the desperate measures taken to keep some secrets buried forever. The truth about what Hitler's scientists were really doing in the frozen wasteland of Antarctica has remained hidden for decades. Until now. Settle in and prepare yourself. Some bedtime stories aren't meant to help you sleep. They're meant to make you question everything you thought you knew about our world. Antarctica, a continent of pristine white desolation where temperatures plunge to -80 degrees and winds howl at 200 miles per hour. A place so inhospitable that nature itself seems to be guarding something. The endless ice sheet, averaging over a mile thick, covers an area larger than the United States and Mexico combined, concealing mountains, valleys, and perhaps secrets that were never meant to be found. But what if the greatest danger isn't the killing cold or the endless darkness of winter? What if the real threat lies beneath the ice, deliberately frozen and forgotten? What if the most terrifying chapters of human history weren't ended with the fall of Berlin in 1945, but merely relocated to the bottom of the world where curious eyes would never think to look? In 1947, the United States launched Operation High Jump, officially a training exercise. But whispers suggested something far more sinister. Over 4,700 military personnel, 13 ships, and multiple aircraft descended upon Antarctica in what appeared to be a massive search operation. The expedition was scheduled to last 6 months, but was abruptly terminated after just 8 weeks. The question nobody asked: what were they really looking for? What did they find that caused such a hasty retreat? The expedition returned early, with losses that were never fully explained. Several planes vanished without trace. Men spoke in hushed tones about strange phenomena: lights in the sky, anomalous weather patterns, equipment failures that defied explanation. Admiral Richard Byrd, who led the mission, cryptically warned in an interview with the Chilean newspaper El Mercurio that the United States should prepare to defend itself against enemy fighters that can fly from pole to pole with incredible speed. The interview was quickly suppressed, and Byrd was ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation upon his return. Documents related to Operation High Jump were classified for decades. Photographs disappeared from archives. Survivors found themselves reassigned to remote postings, scattered across the globe where their stories wouldn't find sympathetic ears. The official narrative became simple. It was just a training exercise, nothing more. But the ice wasn't the only thing keeping these secrets hidden. Powerful forces made sure that whatever was discovered that day would never reach the public. Government agencies systematically removed evidence, altered records, and silenced witnesses. Those who persisted in asking questions often found their careers mysteriously derailed, or worse. What terrible discovery could warrant such elaborate measures to ensure its concealment? What nightmare technology or forbidden knowledge lies frozen beneath Antarctic ice, waiting for the day when global warming might finally expose what our grandparents' generation fought so desperately to keep buried? And perhaps most disturbing of all, is it still down there, preserved in the ice, waiting? Few people know that in 1938, years before Operation High Jump, Nazi Germany dispatched its own expedition to Antarctica. The German Antarctic expedition, led by Captain Alfred Richer aboard the MS Schwabenland, was ostensibly scientific in nature. They mapped and claimed nearly 250,000 square kilometers of Antarctica, naming it Neuschwabenland, New Swabia. Aircraft dropped thousands of Nazi flag-tipped metal darts across the region to stake their claim. Official photographs show smiling crew members taking measurements, collecting samples, and documenting the harsh landscape activities that appeared perfectly innocent to the outside world. But science alone doesn't explain the expedition's unusual composition. Among the crew were members of the Ahnenerbe Heinrich Himmler's Ancestral Research Society and engineers from secret weapons divisions. These weren't mere biologists or geographers. They were specialists in ancient languages, mining technology, and experimental physics. What were they searching for in this frozen wasteland? And more importantly, what did they find? The expedition returned with over 11,000 photographs and several mysterious crates that were immediately transported to a secure facility in Berlin, their contents never publicly disclosed. Intercepted communications, only declassified decades later, reveal that the Nazis were pursuing something specific. Ancient maps in their possession, some allegedly predating modern Antarctic exploration, showed features beneath the ice. These maps, whose origins remain unexplained, depicted tunnel systems and vast caverns that shouldn't have been known to exist. Some scholars have suggested these documents may have come from the extensive collection of Tibetan texts seized during Ahnenerbe expeditions to the Himalayas, texts that spoke of hidden underground realms and advanced civilizations that once inhabited them. By 1943, as Allied bombing intensified over Germany, Hitler authorized Project Ultima Thule, the construction of a facility unlike any other. U-boats began disappearing from Atlantic patrol routes, redirected south, with cargoes of equipment, personnel, and technology. Witnesses reported seeing massive concrete segments being loaded onto specialized vessels, prefabricated components designed for rapid assembly in the most inhospitable environment on Earth. German industrialist and SS officer Hans Kammler, who oversaw the Reich's most secret technological projects, suddenly disappeared from his regular duties for months at a time, his whereabouts classified even from high-ranking Nazi officials. The most disturbing reports came from captured German engineers in 1945. Under interrogation, they spoke of thermal drilling technology developed specifically for ice penetration and a base designed to be completely self-sufficient. They described vast underground chambers carved beneath the ice, connected to natural cavern systems that provided geothermal heat and protection from the elements. One engineer, before committing suicide in his cell, sketched detailed schematics showing a multi-level facility extending nearly a kilometre beneath the ice sheet, with specialised areas for research, living quarters, power generation, and something called Die Glock, the bell, a mysterious device that supposedly altered the very fabric of space and time. When asked about the purpose of this facility, the engineers' answers varied wildly. Some claimed it was merely a refuge for Nazi leadership. Others spoke of laboratories for continuing work on wonder weapons away from Allied bombing. A few, before being abruptly removed from interrogation, mentioned something more chilling: archaeological discoveries that had changed everything about how the Reich viewed human history. They referenced artifacts of non-human origin and technology that defied conventional understanding. One particularly disturbing account described chambers deep beneath the ice containing preserved specimens of beings not catalogued by modern science. What's certain is that between 1943 and 1945, at least 27 German submarines that should have been defending the Atlantic were instead making the long journey to Antarctica. Shipping records show unusual quantities of specialized mining equipment, advanced scientific instruments, and enough provisions to sustain hundreds of people for years. Intercepted communications mentioned a facility codenamed Base 211, or sometimes New Berlin, with regular progress reports sent via encrypted channels directly to Hitler's private office. Most disturbing of all, when the war ended and the Allies captured German naval records, they discovered that 54 U-boats had officially been listed as destroyed in combat, despite no Allied forces claiming their destruction. The vessels' serial numbers had been meticulously documented as lost, yet no wreckage was ever recovered. Among these phantom submarines were some of Germany's most advanced Type XXI U-boats, capable of extended underwater operations and carrying significantly larger cargoes than their predecessors. These submarines, along with their crews and mysterious cargoes, had simply vanished. But perhaps vanished isn't the right word. Perhaps relocated would be more accurate. Even more perplexing were the testimonies from Argentine naval officers who reported continued U-boat activity along their coastline well into 1,946 months after Germany's official surrender. Local fishermen described strange lights in the sky near the Antarctic coast and unexplained weather phenomena that defied meteorological explanation. Radio operators in southern Chile logged bizarre transmissions fragments of German communications emanating from areas where no human settlement should exist. When Operation High Jump was hastily assembled in 1946, its unusual composition raised eyebrows among military analysts. Why would a routine training exercise require an aircraft carrier A submarine, multiple support ships, and heavily armed ground forces? Why would it need seismic detection equipment and ground-penetrating radar technology still in its experimental stages? The expedition's true objectives remained classified, but those who served remembered the tension, the constant alert status, and the strange orders to document and report anything anomalous encountered on or beneath the ice. Whatever slumbered beneath Antarctica's frozen surface was important enough to mobilize America's military might immediately after the most devastating war in human history. Important enough to classify, obscure, and deny for decades afterward. Important enough that even today, certain areas of Antarctica remain mysteriously restricted, off limits to scientific exploration without special clearance. The question remains, what are they still hiding? The bitter Antarctic winds howled across the deck of the USS Philippine Sea as Admiral Richard Byrd surveyed the endless white horizon. It was January 1947, and Operation High Jump was well underway. Officially, they were conducting military training and testing equipment in polar conditions. The real mission briefing, delivered in a sealed room deep within the Pentagon months earlier, had been far more disturbing. "Gentlemen," the Secretary of the Navy had said, "we have reason to believe we are not alone on this continent. The fleet of 13 ships, 33 aircraft, and nearly 5,000 personnel represented the largest expedition to Antarctica in history. Their orders were to locate and assess the German presence, gather intelligence on any advanced technology, and if necessary, neutralize any threat. The mission was expected to last 6 months. It would be abandoned after just 8 weeks. The trouble began almost immediately. 6 days into the operation, a PBM Martin Mariner aircraft disappeared without trace. The official report cited whiteout conditions, but the radio operator's final transmission told a different story. Origin: search and rescue operations found nothing, no wreckage, no oil slick, no emergency signals. 18 men simply vanished into the frozen void. The incident was quickly classified, and families were told their loved ones had died in a tragic accident due to extreme weather conditions. The next incident occurred when a mapping team reported a vast anomaly beneath the ice, a structure too geometric to be natural, too enormous to be man-made. Initial readings suggested a complex extending over 2 square miles, with walls of unusual density and corridors arranged in patterns that one scientist described as mathematically perfect. As they adjusted their equipment to get better readings, all 3 members of the team reported sudden, splitting headaches and nosebleeds. Their instruments failed simultaneously. When they returned to base, all photographic evidence had been inexplicably fogged, and their sensor data corrupted. More disturbing still, all 3 men developed strange radiation burns on the side of their bodies that had faced the anomaly, despite wearing heavy Arctic gear. Strange atmospheric phenomena began to plague the expedition. Radio operators reported hearing voices speaking in German interspersed with unknown languages that linguistic experts aboard could not identify. Compasses would suddenly spin wildly before returning to normal. The aurora australis appeared with unprecedented frequency and intensity, sometimes descending so low that sailors swore they could hear it crackling just above their heads. Men reported vivid, shared nightmares of underground chambers and entities that watched from the darkness. But it was the events of the 26th of February 1947 that forced the mission's premature end. 3 Grumman F-6F Hellcat fighters, on patrol over the Queen Maud Land region, encountered what they described as silvery discs moving at impossible speeds. The objects performed maneuvers that defied known aerodynamics: 90-degree turns at tremendous velocity, instant acceleration from hovering to supersonic speeds, and the ability to split into multiple craft before rejoining. When one of the fighters attempted to intercept, survivors reported watching in horror as it was swatted from the sky by an invisible force. The remaining aircraft experienced complete electrical failure and barely managed to glide back to the bay carrier. The pilot who ejected was never recovered, though search parties reported finding his parachute neatly folded on the ice, weighed down with stones, with no footprints or signs of struggle visible in any direction. That same night, something emerged from the waters near the fleet. Witnesses described it as cylindrical, at least 100 meters long, with no visible propulsion. It hovered silently above the water before disappearing beneath the ice shelf. Sonar operators tracked it moving at over 200 knots faster than any known submarine technology of the era. As it passed beneath each ship in the fleet, electrical systems failed momentarily, and chronometers stopped for precisely 24 seconds before resuming. Men standing watch reported feeling an overwhelming sense of dread and the sensation of being observed by something ancient and patient. Admiral Byrd convened an emergency meeting with his senior officers. The recording of this meeting remains classified, but one leaked transcript quotes Byrd saying, "We have awakened something that should have been left alone. God help us if it follows us home." During this meeting, the ship's chaplain reportedly burst in, visibly shaken, reporting that dozens of men were experiencing the same recurring dream, a vast underground city of black stone, illuminated by an eerie blue light, where human and inhuman figures worked side by side on machines of impossible complexity. The next morning, orders arrived from Washington. Operation High Jump was to be terminated immediately. All evidence was to be confiscated. All personnel were to be debriefed under national security protocols. The official reason given was unexpected severe weather conditions, though meteorological data showed unusually clear and calm conditions for that time of year. As the fleet prepared to depart, a final incident occurred that remains perhaps the most heavily classified of all. According to a sealed deposition only viewed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the USS Senate, a submarine assigned to the operation, reported visual contact with what appeared to be a German U-boat of advanced design. Before intercept was possible, both the U-boat and a section of the ice shelf measuring approximately 1 square kilometre rose from the water, as if on an elevator, revealing a massive opening beneath. The Senate's captain, against direct orders, pursued the U-boat into this opening. Radio contact was maintained for 17 minutes, with the captain describing vast chambers and structures that appear to be machines the size of buildings. His final transmission, "There are people here. They're expecting us." Wait, they're not. All POP. The transmission ended abruptly. The Senate and her crew of 95 men were officially listed as lost due to crushing ice pressure. Upon returning to the United States, Admiral Byrd was immediately summoned to Washington. His private journals from this period, only partially declassified, in 2012, contain a chilling entry. "The enemy we face is not who we thought. The technology they possess is beyond our comprehension. Antarctica must be quarantined at all costs. I have seen evidence that suggests we are dealing with something that predates our understanding of history, something that the Germans have either awakened or allied with. The specimens alone defy classification, neither fully machine nor fully biological. The hieroglyphs match nothing in our archaeological record, yet the Germans seem able to translate them. Most disturbing of all is the suggestion that this is merely an outpost of something far larger and more extensive beneath the ice. May God forgive us for what we may have unleashed." In March 1947, Byrd gave his infamous interview to El Mercurio newspaper in Chile, warning about enemy aircraft that could fly from pole to pole. He was promptly hospitalized for exhaustion, and his public statements were attributed to stress and extreme cold exposure. 3 men from Naval Intelligence remained with him throughout his 6-week hospital stay, monitoring all visitors and communications. Upon release, Byrd was reassigned to administrative duties far from the public eye. His personal effects from the expedition, including photographs, journals, and collected specimens, were confiscated and transported to a facility beneath Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where they reportedly remain to this day. Several scientists who had participated in Operation High Jump died under mysterious circumstances in the following years. Dr. Emil Brauer, the expedition's chief geologist, was found in his home having apparently committed suicide, though the 3 bullets in his chest raised obvious questions. His research on Antarctic anomalies was missing from his office. Dr. Harriet Schumann, who had analysed the radiation patterns from the underground structure, died in a house fire that destroyed all her work. The blaze was hot enough to melt her filing cabinets, but somehow left surrounding homes untouched. Operation High Jump was officially declared a success. Publicly available photographs show smiling sailors and beautiful Antarctic vistas. What they don't show are the missing men, the damaged aircraft, or the fear in the eyes of those who returned. They don't show the nightmares that plagued the survivors, so consistent in their imagery that military psychologists created a classified syndrome called Antarctic intrusion disorder. They don't show the permanent monitoring stations established around Antarctica in the pack, following years disguised as scientific outposts, but reporting directly to military intelligence. And they certainly don't show what followed them home, for in the decades after Operation High Jump, sightings of unidentified flying objects increased exponentially across the globe. Military installations reported security breaches by craft of impossible capabilities, and deep in the Nevada desert, engineers began the painstaking process of reverse engineering technology that officially didn't exist. Technology based on principles that defied conventional physics, recovered from a place that no one was permitted to discuss. The greatest secret of World War II wasn't what ended the conflict, but what emerged from its ashes, hidden beneath the ice, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself to a world unprepared for the truth about its own history. In the decades following Operation High Jump, Antarctica became the silent battlefield of a secret war. While newspapers worldwide focused on the growing tensions between the United States and Soviet Union, both superpowers were quietly pouring resources into the frozen continent for reasons entirely different from their public scientific missions. By 1952, the United States had established Deep Freeze Station Alpha, ostensibly a weather monitoring outpost on the edge of the Ross Ice Shelf. In reality, the facility served as a listening post, with advanced equipment aimed not at the sky, but deep beneath the ice. Declassified personnel logs show an unusual staffing pattern alongside meteorologists. Support staff were cryptographers, linguistic specialists, and military engineers with backgrounds in exotic propulsion systems. The facility's power requirements were puzzlingly excessive for its official purpose, drawing enough electricity to run a small city despite housing fewer than 50 personnel. Monthly supply drops included specialized equipment that never appeared on official inventories: quantum resonance detectors, gravimetric anomaly sensors, and biological containment units rated for BSL-4 pathogens. The Soviets, meanwhile, established their own presence at Vostok Station, positioned suspiciously close to the magnetic anomalies first detected during High Jump. Their drilling program, publicly dedicated to collecting ice cores for climate research, went far deeper than scientifically necessary. Former KGB archivist Mikhail Kuznetsov, who defected in 1991, brought with him fragments of reports describing acoustic anomalies and structured spaces detected beneath the ice at depths exceeding 3 kilometers. One document, heavily redacted even in the original, referenced non-human biological material recovered from these depths and transported to a specialized facility outside Moscow for analysis. The scientists assigned to this analysis subsequently disappeared from public records, their families relocated to closed military cities in Siberia. Most telling was the 1,956 Antarctic Treaty negotiations, where bitter Cold War enemies found unprecedented common ground. The treaty, which prohibited military activity and suspended territorial claims, contained a little discussed clause. Article 7 allowed all areas of Antarctica, including all stations, installations and equipment, and all ships and aircraft to be open for inspection by any treaty member. This created a legal framework for both superpowers to monitor each other's activities and whatever else might be happening beneath the ice. What historians have failed to note is that the initial draft of the treaty, proposed jointly by American and Soviet delegations, included provisions for coordinated military action in the event of emergence of heretofore unknown entities or forces from beneath the Antarctic surface. This clause was removed from the final version after objections from smaller nations, but a classified addendum, signed separately by the major powers, is rumoured to contain similar provisions. The true nature of these inspections became clear in the winter of 1958, when a joint US-Soviet team disappeared during what was officially described as a routine survey mission. Their last transmission, intercepted by a Chilean monitoring station but immediately classified, contained a single phrase in Russian: "They are not German." Repeat, "They are not German." Search parties reported finding the team's abandoned equipment 70 miles from their last known position, arranged in a perfect circle, with all batteries drained and compasses displaying impossible readings. More disturbing were the footprints leading away from the site, human boots walking alongside something with a three-toed, triangular foot pattern unlike any known Antarctic wildlife. The prints continued for 2 miles before abruptly ending in the middle of an untouched snowfield. Throughout the 1,960 seconds, military personnel stationed at Antarctica reported increasing instances of equipment failure, unexplained sounds, and psychological disturbances. Declassified medical records show an epidemic of sleep disorders, with affected individuals reporting identical dreams of vast machinery and beings that speak directly into your mind. Base commanders instituted mandatory psychological evaluations and began rotating personnel every 6 months instead of the standard one-year deployment. Particularly concerning were cases of Antarctic synchronicity, incidents where multiple individuals, often in different locations, would experience identical hallucinations simultaneously, or perform the same unusual actions without communication. In one documented case from 1,963, 17 personnel at 3 separate stations all walked outside at exactly 3:33 a.m. local time, stood facing the same coordinates in the Antarctic interior, and remained motionless for precisely 27 minutes before returning to their quarters with no memory of the event. The most disturbing incident occurred in 1965 at the American Plateau Station. According to heavily redacted reports, a drilling team broke through into what they believed was a subglacial lake. Instead, they found themselves opening into what team leader Dr. James Merritt described as an engineered space of immense proportions. Before they could investigate further, all communications with the drilling team ceased. A rescue party found the drill site abandoned, with equipment neatly arranged and no signs of struggle. The 6-man team had vanished. Most chilling was the voice recorder, still running, which captured 2 hours of silence followed by a single sentence in an unidentified language, and what analysts described as the sound of something vast moving through a confined space. Subsequent analysis of the audio by linguistic experts yielded troubling results. Unknown language contained phonemic patterns that should be, physically, impossible for human vocal anatomy to produce, yet displayed sophisticated grammatical structure indicating true language rather than random sounds. In response to these events, both superpowers quietly militarized their Antarctic operations while maintaining the pretense of scientific research. The Americans developed Project Iceworm, officially a mobile nuclear missile launch system beneath the Greenland ice sheet. A parallel program, never officially acknowledged, established similar facilities in Antarctica, not to launch missiles, but to deploy specialized weapons designed to combat non-conventional entities. These included devices that generated specific electromagnetic frequency patterns found to disrupt certain types of unknown technology, as well as biological agents developed from organisms found preserved in Antarctic ice cores, organisms with unusual resistance to radiation and extreme conditions. The Soviets pursued a different approach. Their deep drilling at Vostok continued, but with modified equipment that some researchers believe was designed not just to penetrate the ice, but to seal it behind them. In 1975, seismic monitors worldwide detected what appeared to be an underground nuclear detonation in East Antarctica, despite the treaty's clear prohibition of such tests. When questioned, Soviet authorities attributed the readings to a naturally occurring icequake. US satellite imagery from the following weeks showed unusual activity at Vostok, with new structures appearing and then being covered with artificial snow. Radiation monitoring stations in Australia and South Africa detected unusual isotope patterns in the atmosphere in the months following, consistent with an explosion that was not entirely nuclear in nature, but something more exotic. Soviet scientific publications from this period contain cryptic references to successful containment of non-standard dimensional anomalies and closure of potential transit points. Perhaps most telling was the creation of a joint US-Soviet Special Operations team in 1977 at the height of the Cold War, codenamed Chariot Group. This unprecedented collaboration remained unknown to even high-level officials in both governments. Consisting of Special Forces operators, scientific specialists, and what documents cryptically refer to as sensitives, Chariot Group conducted at least 7 documented missions beneath the Antarctic ice, with all records of their activities and findings still classified beyond top secret. Their operational protocols included unusual equipment, modified diving gear capable of functioning in liquid environments other than water, weapons with non-metallic components, and communication devices that operated through means other than electromagnetic transmission. Most puzzling were the cognitive anchors, small devices worn by all team members that supposedly helped maintain psychological continuity in the presence of non-Euclidean spatial configurations. Former Chariot Group member Thomas Caldwell, speaking from his deathbed in 2019 after being diagnosed with terminal cancer, provided the only known testimony about these missions. Before being silenced by a court order, he described entering vast, engineered spaces that predated human civilization and encountering evidence of ongoing activity that could not be attributed to the Germans or any known human agency. Most disturbing was his claim that during their final mission in 1982, they discovered a chamber containing thousands of human specimens, preserved in a manner we couldn't understand, some showing signs of hybridization with something not from Earth. According to Caldwell, these specimens spanned historical periods from ancient to modern, with some appearing to be prototypes rather than naturally occurring humans. "They're farming us," he whispered. "Have been for millennia. The Germans just made a deal with the farmers." The Antarctic focus shifted dramatically in 1983, when both US and Soviet leaders received identical messages through their most secure communication channels. The content of these messages remains classified, but the response was immediate. Antarctic operations were scaled back. Certain areas were designated completely off-limits, and the superpowers' attention turned towards space-based defense systems. President Reagan's Star Wars program, publicly aimed at Soviet missiles, was privately understood by insiders to have a very different target. Specifically, the program's emphasis on directed energy weapons and particle beams aligned perfectly with theoretical models for disrupting the propulsion systems of the craft, occasionally seen emerging from Antarctic waters. Similarly, the Soviet Union's increased focus on their Polyus orbital weapons platform included capabilities far beyond what would be needed for conventional warfare, including sensors specifically designed to track objects moving between atmospheric and suboceanic environments at impossible speeds. By the 1992, with the Cold War ending, Antarctica again faded from military priority. Monitoring continued through automated systems and satellite surveillance, but direct confrontation had apparently been deemed too dangerous. Instead, a new approach emerged: containment, specialized. Equipment installed at key points around the Antarctic perimeter created what one classified document called a resonance barrier, designed not to keep physical objects in or out, but to prevent information transfer across dimensional boundaries, a concept barely comprehensible with mainstream physics, but apparently crucial to the containment strategy. The Antarctic Treaty was strengthened with environmental protection protocols that, while serving legitimate conservation purposes, also created a legal framework to restrict access to sensitive areas. Scientific research was carefully channeled toward non-threatening regions. Tourism was permitted but tightly controlled along predetermined routes. Satellite imaging available to the public was subtly altered to obscure certain geographical features, particularly in East Antarctica, where the ice sheet hides what some glaciologists have privately termed architectural anomalies, extending for hundreds of kilometers in geometric patterns too regular to be natural formations. And deep beneath the agencies officially tasked with Antarctic governance, a small multinational group continued to monitor the situation, analyzing patterns of seismic activity, unusual atmospheric phenomena, and unexplained disappearances. Their existence is known to only a handful of world leaders. Their purpose? To maintain the quarantine and ensure that what dwells beneath the ice remains there. This group, operating under the innocuous name International Polar Year Continuity Committee, maintains no official records and communicates through secure channels using a specialized language developed specifically to discuss Antarctic phenomena, without triggering automated monitoring systems. Their annual budget, dispersed through dozens of front organizations and research grants, exceeds that of many countries' entire defense spending. But in recent years, they've been detecting changes, increased activity, movement patterns suggesting purpose and coordination, and most concerning of all, evidence of expansion. Deep penetrating radar surveys reveal vast chambers that appear to be growing in size, tunnels extending toward coastal regions, and thermal anomalies indicating energy production on a massive scale. Glaciologists report ice thinning from below in patterns that defy natural explanation. Acoustic. Sensors detect mechanical sounds and communications in unknown languages, increasing in frequency and duration. Most alarming are the biological samples recovered from Antarctic waters, microbial organisms with DNA unlike anything in Earth's evolutionary history, yet containing gene sequences identical to those found in humans. These organisms appear to be engineered rather than evolved, with capabilities that include restructuring organic matter at the cellular level. Several research scientists working with these samples have reported waking with small, precisely made incisions on their bodies, followed by changes in their cognitive patterns and sleep cycles. At least 17 such researchers have disappeared after reporting voices calling them to Antarctica. Whatever slumbers beneath Antarctica is beginning to awaken. And this time, it may not be content to remain hidden. The ice itself seems to be responding to some unseen influence. Satellite measurements show subtle geometric patterns forming in the snow cover, visible only when viewed through specific electromagnetic frequencies. These patterns match no known human language or mathematical system, yet display clear signs of intelligent design and purpose. Some researchers believe they may be a form of communication or perhaps, more worryingly, a form of technological activation spreading across the continent's surface. As global warming accelerates ice melt across Antarctica, scientists publicly worry about rising sea levels. Privately, a select few worry about what might be uncovered or unleashed as the ancient ice retreats. For the first time in perhaps millions of years, what lies beneath is finding the barriers to our world thinning. And in the deepest, most restricted zone of East Antarctica, satellites have detected a massive heat signature growing steadily stronger, like a beacon or a warning. The question is no longer whether humanity will confront what dwells beneath the ice, but when, and whether we have any hope of surviving the encounter. In 2001, a watershed moment in Antarctic research occurred when satellite imaging revealed what came to be known as the Mühlenfeld anomaly, named after Dr. Elise Mühlenfeld, the German glaciologist who first identified it. What appeared to casual observers as merely another feature in the endless Antarctic ice was, to trained eyes, something extraordinary, a perfect hexagonal depression measuring approximately 27 kilometers across, with depth measurements suggesting it extended at least 3 kilometers beneath the surface. The precision of its geometry defied natural explanation. The angles maintained perfect 120-degree intersections regardless of the surrounding terrain, and the depression's walls descended at a mathematically precise 47-degree angle throughout their entire depth. The official explanation, a previously unknown type of ice formation caused by geothermal activity, satisfied the public but raised alarming questions within the scientific community. Thermal imaging showed the anomaly maintained a constant temperature of precisely 4 degrees Celsius regardless of surface conditions, an impossibility for any natural formation. More disturbing were the subtle gravitational anomalies detected in the region, suggesting a mass beneath the ice far greater than could be accounted for by known geological processes. Instruments registered gravitational variations that oscillated according to patterns that mathematicians identified as non-random but non-repeating, suggesting they were either artificially generated or operating according to physical principles beyond current scientific understanding. When an international research team was assembled to investigate the Mühlenfeld anomaly in 2003, strange events began to unfold. First, 3 key scientists withdrew from the expedition after experiencing what medical records described as identical night terrors, featuring geometric structures and non-human entities. These night terrors shared specific details that could not be attributed to cultural or psychological commonalities. Each scientist independently described the same specific architectural features, including corridors that turn at impossible angles and chambers where gravity pulls in multiple directions simultaneously. More disturbing still, brain scans performed on these scientists showed identical patterns of unusual activity in regions associated with spatial perception and pattern recognition patterns that neurologists described as inconsistent with any known psychological condition. Then, critical equipment failed during transport under circumstances that investigators deemed mechanically impossible. Specialized sensors designed to measure exotic energy signatures were found completely inverted, their internal components precisely reassembled in mirror image configurations that would have required complete disassembly and reconstruction, all while the tamper-proof seals remained intact. Storage devices containing baseline data and operational parameters were found to contain entirely different information. complex mathematical equations and geometric diagrams that specialists in advanced physics described as potentially representing a form of propulsion theory beyond current human development. Finally, a freak storm appearing literally out of clear skies, according to weather monitoring stations, forced the remaining team to abandon their approach just 15 kilometers from the anomaly's perimeter. Meteorologists analyzing the event found it violated fundamental atmospheric physics. The storm formed without temperature differentials or pressure systems to generate it, maintained perfect symmetry throughout its duration, and dispersed completely within 3 minutes of the research team's retreat to a predetermined distance from the anomaly. Most puzzling were the electromagnetic readings taken during the event, which showed patterns identical to those detected emanating from deep beneath the ice. The expedition was officially postponed, then quietly cancelled. Dr. Mühlenfeld herself disappeared 3 months later while attending a conference in Geneva. Her hotel room was found empty, with her laptop open to a single document containing the repeated phrase, "They've been waiting. They've always been waiting." Forensic analysis of the room found no evidence of forced entry or struggle, but detected unusual radiation signatures on all electronic equipment. Most disturbing was the discovery that every reflective surface in the room, mirrors, windows, even the screen of her laptop, had been meticulously covered with precisely drawn geometric symbols using a substance that chemical analysis identified as containing organic compounds not matching any known terrestrial biology. In 2005, a more disturbing connection emerged. Historians at the University of Buenos Aires discovered previously classified Nazi documents detailing Operation Schwarze Sonne, Black Sun, a 1944 expedition to Antarctica led by high-ranking SS officials and scientists from the Ahnenerbe organization. The documents contained coordinates that, when plotted on modern maps, corresponded exactly with the center of the Mühlenfeld anomaly. More chilling were the expedition's stated objectives: to establish contact with the anterior ones, secure their alliance through the offering of biological specimens and technological exchange. The documents included technical specifications for equipment that German engineering of the era should not have been capable of producing devices for transglacial communication and dimensional boundary penetration. Most disturbing was a reference to securing access to the lower chambers where the hybridization program can proceed without Allied interference. Accompanying these specifications were detailed anatomical diagrams showing human subjects modified with unknown technological components, alongside notes describing the necessary physiological adaptations for humans to function within the altered spatial parameters of the lower chambers. These diagrams included modifications to the human nervous system, sensory organs, and even fundamental aspects of cellular biology that modern medical science still cannot fully comprehend. Perhaps most chilling were the philosophical and occult texts accompanying the technical documents' writings that combined ancient mystical traditions with a disturbing interpretation of human evolution and destiny. These texts described humanity as an engineered species whose development has been guided towards specific biological and cognitive endpoints by the anterior ones since before recorded history. They further suggested that certain bloodlines, particularly those the Nazi ideology identified as pure, possessed genetic markers, making them more compatible with the next phase of directed evolution. These revelations coincided with a series of unexplained events across the globe. Between 2006 and 2008, 17 research vessels operating in Antarctic waters reported encounters with unidentified submersible objects moving at speeds exceeding 200 knots and demonstrating the ability to transition seamlessly between water and air. Multiple independent witnesses described these objects as metallic spheres approximately 30 meters in diameter that emitted no visible propulsion exhaust yet displaced water in ways that violated hydrodynamic principles. Most disturbing were reports of these objects approaching research vessels and scanning them with some form of energy beam that penetrated all shielding and temporarily disrupted both electronic systems and the consciousness of crew members exposed to it. Acoustic sensors detected communication signals of unknown origin emanating from beneath the ice, using frequency patterns that seemed designed to affect human neurological functions. Crew members exposed to these signals reported altered states of consciousness and vivid hallucinations of vast machines and entities that exist between states of matter. Neuroscientists analyzing recorded samples of these signals discovered they contained embedded patterns that directly stimulated specific regions of the human brain associated with spatial perception and certain types of abstract cognition. More disturbing was the discovery that prolonged exposure appeared to create permanent changes in neural architecture, effectively rewiring human perception in ways that made certain previously imperceptible phenomena visible. In scientific communities, a troubling pattern emerged. Among researchers studying Antarctic phenomena, statisticians noted that such scientists experienced a 400% higher rate of rare cancers, unexplained neurological conditions, and psychological disorders characterized by obsessive focus on geometric patterns and non-human architectural spaces. Medical examinations of affected individuals revealed subtle but significant changes to their brain structure, particularly in regions associated with processing visual information and spatial relationships. PET scans showed unusual activity patterns suggesting these individuals were perceiving aspects of reality invisible to unaffected subjects. Most concerning was the pattern of disappearances between 2001 and 2010. 23 scientists with access to classified Antarctic research simply vanished without trace. In each case, investigators found the same puzzling clues: personal, research materials meticulously organized as if in preparation for departure, and electronic devices containing corrupted image files that, when partially reconstructed, showed fragments of structures that appeared to be neither natural formations nor human architecture. In several cases, these missing researchers had left behind journals describing increasingly vivid dreams of vast underground chambers where beings of light and shadow work on technologies that reshape matter and consciousness itself. The final entries often expressed not fear but a sense of anticipation, as if they were preparing for some long-awaited invitation or transformation. The technological dimension of the Antarctic mystery deepened in 2012 when a private research vessel, the Schiaparelli, violated exclusion zone protocols and approached the Mühlenfeld anomaly with advanced ground-penetrating radar equipment. The vessel, funded by an anonymous consortium of wealthy individuals with connections to fringe scientific research, carried a team of specialists in various fields, all of whom had previously reported unusual dreams and compulsions related to Antarctica. Their mission, according to encrypted communications later recovered, was not merely scientific investigation but initiation, contact, and securing the knowledge promised to those who answer the calling. Before authorities could intercept them, the Schiaparelli transmitted a partial data package showing what appeared to be an artificial structure of enormous proportions beneath the ice. The vessel and its 12 crew members disappeared shortly after transmission. Search and rescue operations found no wreckage, but recovered a single life jacket bearing an unusual pattern of burns consistent with exposure to exotic radiation. More puzzling was the discovery that the burn patterns formed precise mathematical expressions in a notational system that mathematicians identified as potentially representing a form of calculation capable of describing phenomena beyond conventional physics. The data package, though heavily corrupted, contained fragments that sent shockwaves through the classified scientific community. The partial scans revealed a structure extending at least 8 kilometers beneath the ice surface, with architectural features suggesting both manufacturing capabilities and habitation spaces of unknown purpose. The structure appeared to incorporate both mechanical and biological components in ways that defied conventional engineering principles. Living tissue seamlessly integrated with metallic and crystalline structures to form functional systems of incomprehensible complexity. Most disturbing were the power signatures, energy readings indicating a source that operated on principles outside conventional physics, generating output equivalent to several nuclear power plants without any detectable radiation or thermal signature. Theoretical physicists analyzing these readings suggested they might represent a technology capable of extracting energy directly from the quantum vacuum or possibly from dimensional interfaces, hypothetical boundaries between our reality and others that exist alongside it. By 2015, multiple governments had established specialized research groups focused on what internal documents referred to as the Antarctic situation. These groups operated under various innocuous covers: glaciological research, climate studies, marine biology, but shared personnel and findings through secure channels isolated from conventional intelligence networks. Their combined findings painted a disturbing picture. Whatever existed beneath the Antarctic ice was not merely a relic of some ancient or alien civilization, but an active, expanding presence that appeared to be implementing a long-term strategic plan. Evidence for this came from multiple sources. Geological monitoring stations detected systematic patterns of microseismic activity consistent with large-scale excavation or construction. The patterns contained rhythmic sequences that acoustic analysts identified as potentially representing a form of communication or coordination between multiple operation sites spread across thousands of kilometers beneath the ice. Glaciologists noted that ice flows around certain regions behave contrary to physical models, as if being deliberately manipulated. Satellite imaging revealed subtle but unmistakable patterns, forming in the ice sheet itself, geometric arrangements visible only when viewed through specific wavelengths, suggesting a form of technology capable of reorganizing molecular structures across vast distances. Most concerning were the biological samples recovered from Antarctic waters near the anomaly zones, organisms that exhibited both terrestrial and non-terrestrial DNA, engineered with a precision beyond current human capabilities. These organisms displayed remarkable properties: cellular structures capable of functioning in multiple hostile environments, metabolic processes that could utilize virtually any energy source, and most disturbing, neural networks that appeared designed to interface with both electronic systems and organic nervous systems of various species. Genetic analysis revealed that some of these organisms contained human DNA sequences, modified, integrated with unknown genetic material, in ways that suggested deliberate design rather than natural evolution or conventional bioengineering. The breakthrough, or perhaps the breaking point, came in 2018, when a joint Russian-Chinese expedition operating under the auspices of climate research deployed a specialized probe into a deep ice fissure near the Mühlenfeld anomaly. The probe, equipped with advanced sensors and communication capabilities, transmitted for 47 minutes before contact was lost. The data it returned has never been officially acknowledged, but leaked fragments describe corridors of non-Euclidean geometry and chambers containing both mechanical and biological components integrated in ways that suggest a technology based on principles fundamentally different from human engineering. The probe sensors detected atmospheric conditions that should not have been possible in a subglacial environment: perfectly regulated temperature and humidity, air composition optimized for both human and non-human respiration, and most puzzlingly, light sources that emitted wavelengths calibrated to affect specific cognitive and biological functions in terrestrial organisms. The architecture it encountered defied conventional spatial logic rooms that appeared to be larger inside than their external dimensions would allow, corridors that connected spaces in ways that violated three-dimensional geometry, and structures composed of materials that seemed to phase between solid and energy states, according to some incomprehensible pattern or purpose. Most disturbing was the probe's final transmission, which captured images of what appeared to be human figures working alongside non-human entities in what researchers described as a manufacturing facility of vast proportions. The humans moved with unnatural coordination, their expressions blank, modified with technological components integrated directly into their nervous systems. Some appeared to be historical figures, long presumed dead, including several scientists who had disappeared during earlier Antarctic expeditions, and, most shockingly, individuals matching the descriptions and photographs of Nazi scientists thought to have perished at the end of World War II, yet showing no signs of aging beyond their documented appearances from the 1,940 seconds. The non-human entities defied easy description, seeming to shift between states of matter as they moved through spaces that appeared to violate normal physical laws. The most consistent description, compiled from analyses by multiple experts who viewed the footage, suggested beings composed of luminous, geometrical patterns arranged in configurations that imply both biological and technological functions, capable of manipulating matter and energy through direct interaction rather than through tools or intermediary devices. These entities appeared to be directing the operation, with the modified humans serving as either assistants or interfaces with the physical environment. The facility itself appeared to be producing objects that defied categorization devices that incorporated both mechanical and biological components in seamless integration, designed according to principles entirely outside human technological development. Some analysts suggested these devices might represent components of a larger system being assembled for unknown purposes, potentially related to communication, transportation, or reality manipulation on a scale beyond current scientific comprehension. The response to this discovery was swift and comprehensive. All civilian research within 500 kilometers of the anomaly was terminated. Military presence in Antarctic waters increased dramatically, though under the cover of environmental protection and anti-poaching operations. Most significantly, a new international agreement publicly presented as an extension of environmental protection protocols established unprecedented restrictions on Antarctic airspace and waters, enforced by a multinational security force operating with shoot-down authority. Behind this public security cordon, a more specialized containment effort took shape. Using technology derived from both conventional physics and more exotic research, a network of devices was established around the anomaly zone, designed not to prevent physical passage, but to create what classified documents describe as a cognitive barrier, a field that affects human perception and thought patterns, generating feelings of fear and disorientation in anyone attempting to approach the restricted zone without proper neurological conditioning. These devices, based partly on reverse-engineered technology recovered from earlier Antarctic expeditions, emit precisely calibrated electromagnetic frequencies that interfere with specific neural processes associated with perception and decision-making, effectively rendering the anomaly zone psychologically inaccessible to unauthorized individuals. Complementing this technological barrier is a sophisticated disinformation program targeting both scientific communities and the general public. This program includes the deliberate release of easily debunked conspiracy theories about Antarctic secrets, designed to associate any genuine information that might leak with obvious falsehoods, thereby discrediting legitimate concerns by association. More subtly, it involves the systematic alteration of scientific data from Antarctic research, ensuring that patterns potentially revealing the anomaly's nature or activities remain fragmented and inconclusive when accessed through conventional channels. By 2020, the situation had reached an uneasy equilibrium. Whatever dwelled beneath the Antarctic ice appeared content to remain there for the moment, while human authorities maintained their containment and observation protocols. But subtle signs suggested this equilibrium was temporary. The energy signatures from beneath the ice were steadily increasing in strength and complexity, suggesting an acceleration of whatever processes or technologies were operating there. Biological samples showed accelerating sophistication in their engineering, with newer specimens displaying capabilities that blurred the boundaries between organic life, mechanical systems, and information processing technologies. And perhaps most concerning, the psychological effects associated with the anomaly were expanding in range individuals with no direct connection to Antarctic research began reporting dreams and compulsions identical to those experienced by scientists directly exposed to the phenomenon. These reports emerged from across the globe, with affected individuals sharing no common factors beyond certain subtle neurological traits that researchers identified as potentially representing a genetic predisposition to receive or interpret certain types of signals. Most disturbing was the content of these shared experiences, visions of vast underground spaces where the future of humanity is being incubated, and an overwhelming sense that something ancient is preparing to emerge into the world once again. In scientific circles, a disturbing theory gained traction. What lay beneath the ice was not merely waiting, it was preparing. The hybridization program, glimpsed in Nazi documents and modern probe footage, appeared to be reaching some culmination point. The technology being developed in those vast underground chambers seemed designed for deployment beyond Antarctica, and the neurological effects radiating outward suggested a form of preparation, a gradual conditioning of human consciousness for what was to come. Analysis of historical records revealed unsettling patterns, suggesting this preparation had been underway for centuries, or even millennia. Anthropologists identified curious similarities in otherwise unrelated ancient cultures, shared symbols, architectural motifs, and mythological themes that seemed reference beings from beneath the ice, or the white land to the south. Linguistic studies found that certain concepts related to transformation, hybridization, and the return of the ancient guides appeared across disparate languages with suspicious consistency. Archaeological discoveries revealed artifacts from multiple ancient civilizations that depicted remarkably similar entities and technologies to those captured in the probe footage, often associated with prophecies of a time when those who shaped humanity would return to complete their work. In late 2022, a classified assessment prepared for the highest levels of world governments reached a chilling conclusion. The Antarctic entity appears to be implementing the final stages of a plan set in motion centuries or perhaps millennia ago. Evidence suggests this plan involves fundamental alterations to both human, civilization and Earth's biosphere. Timeline to completion: approximately 36 months. The document detailed observed changes that supported this assessment. Increasing frequency and complexity of signals emanating from beneath the ice. Acceleration in the development and release of engineered biological agents into Antarctic waters. Systematic alterations to the continent's electromagnetic field in patterns consistent with the establishment of a large-scale technological network. And most concerning, evidence that the anomaly zone was expanding at an accelerating rate, with new structures and activity detected well beyond its original boundaries. More troubling still were the document's projections regarding human response capabilities. Analysis of affected individuals, those experiencing the dreams and compulsions, revealed subtle but progressive changes to their neurochemistry and cognitive patterns. These changes appeared designed to make them more receptive to certain types of information or influence, potentially creating a global network of unwitting receivers for whatever form of communication or control the Antarctic entity might attempt to establish. More concerning was the discovery that individuals in positions of scientific, political, and military authority showed statistically higher rates of these changes, suggesting either targeted influence or a deliberate infiltration strategy spanning decades. The document ended with a question that haunts those few individuals aware of its contents. Given our current understanding and capabilities, is resistance even possible? Or should resources be directed toward adaptation to a post-disclosure world in which humanity is no longer the dominant species on this planet? This question has divided the small group of individuals with full knowledge of the situation. One faction advocates for aggressive containment, the development and deployment of weapons based on principles derived from limited understanding of the Antarctic technology, designed to seal or destroy the Antarctic anomaly zone entirely. Another argues for attempted communication and negotiation, suggesting that the entity's long-term interaction with humanity implies some form of symbiotic relationship rather than purely hostile intent. A third, growing faction proposes a more radical approach: selective, human adaptation to whatever changes are coming, through controlled exposure to the biological and technological elements emerging from Antarctica. As 2023 dawned, unusual atmospheric phenomena began appearing over Antarctica lights and patterns in the sky that defied conventional explanation. These manifestations, visible even through satellite imagery, formed complex geometric arrangements that mathematicians identified as potentially representing a form of visual language, symbols and structures, conveying information through their spatial relationships rather than through sequential patterns like human writing. More concerning was the discovery that these aerial phenomena generated specific electromagnetic frequencies that, when analyzed, showed striking similarities to the patterns of human brainwave activity during certain cognitive processes. Oceanographers reported unprecedented changes in deep ocean currents originating near the Antarctic coast. These currents carried unusual thermal and chemical signatures, along with microscopic biological agents that preliminary analysis suggested were designed to gradually alter marine ecosystems through subtle modifications to key species. These modifications appeared non-harmful in isolation, but when modeled across multiple generations and species, projected toward a fundamental restructuring of Earth's oceanic biosphere, creating environments more hospitable to the engineered organisms first detected near the anomaly zone. And across the globe, individuals with no previous connection to Antarctica began experiencing what psychologists termed invasive cognition events. Moments when their normal thought patterns were interrupted by vivid impressions of vast, cold spaces and ancient, patient entities finally stirring from their long dormancy. These experiences, initially dismissed as mass hysteria or the result of media influence, showed disturbing consistency in specific details that affected individuals could not have shared or coordinated. More concerning was the discovery that these events corresponded precisely with measurable pulses of exotic energy emanating from the Antarctic region, suggesting a form of direct information transfer operating outside known physical principles. Most alarming of all were the changes observed in children born after 2020, particularly those whose parents had experienced the dreams or compulsions associated with the Antarctic influence. Pediatric researchers documented subtle but significant differences in these children's neurological development, sensory capabilities, and cognitive processes. They demonstrated enhanced pattern recognition, unusual facility with certain types of mathematical concepts, and in some cases, the ability to perceive electromagnetic phenomena normally invisible to human senses. Some researchers suggested these changes represented the first generation of humans born with neural architecture, specifically adapted to interface with whatever technologies or entities were emerging from Antarctica, the leading edge of a directed evolutionary shift. The clock is ticking, the ice is thinning, and what has been hidden for ages beneath the frozen wasteland is preparing to emerge into a world that has forgotten it was ever there, a world utterly unprepared for the revelation that humans have never been alone, nor have they ever truly been in control of their own destiny. Across the globe, monitoring stations register steadily increasing energy signatures emanating from the Antarctic continent. Satellite imagery captures expanding networks of geometric patterns forming in the ice, visible only through specific wavelengths. Specialized sensors detect complex information patterns propagating through Earth's electromagnetic field, originating from beneath the ice and reaching into every corner of the planet. And in secure facilities around the world, the few individuals with full knowledge of the situation watch and wait, knowing that the greatest deception in human history is about to unravel. And when it does, the very definition of humanity itself may change forever. For what dwells beneath Antarctica is not merely an alien presence or forgotten technology, it is the architect of human civilization itself. Returning to complete work begun millennia ago, the Nazi connection was merely the most recent instance of contact, one thread in a tapestry of influence and direction stretching back to the dawn of human consciousness. And now, as the ice retreats and global systems approach the specific conditions this entity has been patiently engineering, the true purpose behind humanity's guided development is about to be revealed. The question is no longer whether we will meet our makers, but whether we will recognize ourselves after they have finished remaking us once again. In January 2024, the equilibrium that had been maintained for decades finally shattered. The event that would later be known simply as the Pulse began at 3:47 UTC when Seismic 5 monitoring stations worldwide detected a massive energy surge originating from the Mühlenfeld anomaly. Unlike a conventional earthquake, this event registered not as mechanical energy moving through the Earth's crust, but as a complex electromagnetic phenomenon that momentarily disrupted electronic systems across the entire southern hemisphere. Satellite imagery captured the moment in stunning clarity. A column of luminous energy erupting from the center of the anomaly, reaching an estimated altitude of 80 kilometers before dispersing into the upper atmosphere. Spectroscopic analysis revealed this energy contained frequencies and patterns never before recorded in natural or human-generated phenomena. Most disturbing was the effect this energy had on Earth's magnetosphere, creating ripple patterns that propagated globally within minutes, temporarily altering the planet's electromagnetic field in ways that theoretical physicists described as selective phase shifting of quantum probability states. The immediate effects were both subtle and profound. An estimated 1.7 billion people worldwide reported experiencing the same dream at the moment of the pulse, a vision of standing in a vast chamber beneath the ice, witnessing beings of light and geometry, communicating a message that, upon waking, most could recall only as a profound sense of imminent transformation and the fulfillment of ancient design. More concerning were the 23 million individuals who, after experiencing this dream, demonstrated measurable neurological changes, including enhanced sensory perception, altered brainwave patterns, and in some cases, the ability to perceive and interpret the electromagnetic anomalies now emanating from Antarctica. These individuals, soon dubbed the Resonant by mainstream media, shared no obvious demographic or geographic commonalities. They included people of all ages, ethnicities, and backgrounds, though statistical analysis would later reveal subtle genetic markers common to many affected individuals, markers that geneticists identified as archaic insertions previously attributed to random mutations or ancient hominin interbreeding events. More disturbing was the discovery that these genetic markers appeared to have been deliberately preserved and propagated throughout human evolutionary history through mechanisms that defied conventional understanding of genetic inheritance and selection. The resonant reported a consistent experience, a newfound awareness of signals or presences that had always been there but never before perceptible, and an intuitive understanding of certain mathematical and benign, geometric concepts previously beyond human comprehension. Many described perceiving reality itself as more complex and layered than they had previously understood, with some reporting the ability to occasionally glimpse spaces between conventional dimensions or entities that exist partially in our reality and partially elsewhere. Most concerning was the universal sense among the resonant that they were being prepared for some imminent event, what many described as the emergence or the reunion. The global response to these developments fractured along predictable lines. Military and intelligence organizations worldwide implemented containment protocols, establishing a multinational security perimeter around Antarctica enforced by unprecedented cooperation between otherwise hostile powers. Scientific institutions mobilized to study both the Antarctic phenomena and the neurological changes manifesting in the resonant, though these efforts were hampered by the rapid failure of electronic equipment in proximity to affected individuals or Antarctic energy signatures. Religious organizations offered wildly divergent interpretations, from apocalyptic prophecies to promises of spiritual transcendence. Curiously, certain obscure religious texts and traditions suddenly gained prominence as they were found to contain detailed descriptions of phenomena matching current events, including ancient Sumerian tablets describing the shapers beneath southern ice, who would return to complete the fashioning of humanity when the stars aligned, and a previously overlooked Dead Sea Scroll fragment that depicted beings of living geometry emerging from the Great White Land to remake the children of Adam according to the original design. Most unexpected was the response from certain indigenous populations, particularly those with ancient connections to Antarctica. Elders from Maori, Mapuche, and other Southern Hemisphere indigenous groups came forward with oral traditions describing ancient contact with the architects or the shapers, retreated beneath the ice until the appointed time. These traditions included detailed knowledge of Antarctic geography that predated official exploration, descriptions of technology matching what modern probes had glimpsed beneath the ice, and warnings about a time when those who made humanity would return to complete their work. By March 2024, the situation had escalated dramatically. The energy emissions from Antarctica had increased in both frequency and complexity, with new patterns emerging that communications experts identified as potentially representing a form of language, data transmission. More concerning were the biological changes now detected in Antarctic waters, engineered organisms spreading outward from the continent, carrying genetic modifications that appeared designed to systematically alter Earth's marine ecosystems through subtle but cumulative changes to key species. The resonant, meanwhile, had begun to organize into loosely connected networks, drawn together by shared experiences and an intuitive understanding of their role in whatever was unfolding. Most troubling to authorities was the discovery that many resonant individuals had begun independently creating identical geometric structures and devices using materials ranging from simple household items to advanced electronics. When questioned, they described these constructions as receivers or translators, designed to facilitate clearer communication with those beneath the first ice. Even more concerning was the discovery that these devices, when assembled correctly, actually functioned, generating small-scale versions of the energy patterns emanating from Antarctica and facilitating more direct neurological connection between resonant individuals and whatever intelligence was orchestrating events. In April 2024, the first direct contact occurred. During a multinational research expedition monitoring the expanding anomaly zone, a team of scientists and military personnel encountered what official reports described only as direct manifestation of non-human intelligence. The few survivors returned with fragmented accounts of beings composed of geometric light patterns arranged in configurations that suggested both biological and technological functions, who communicated through direct neural interface rather than conventional language. The content of this communication has never been publicly disclosed, but leaked fragments suggest it included both historical context, confirming millennia of influence on human development, and a clear statement of imminent intent. The preparation phase is complete. Integration will now commence. The global response to this contact was swift and dramatic. Military forces worldwide were placed on high alert, with specialized units deploying experimental weapons systems designed to counter the Antarctic technology based on limited understanding of its principles. Space agencies redirected satellites to maintain continuous observation of the continent, while oceanographic vessels established a monitoring perimeter to track biological and energy emissions spreading from Antarctic waters. Most significant was the formation of the Antarctic Containment and Research Initiative, ACRI, a multinational organization granted unprecedented authority to coordinate the human response to what was now openly acknowledged, at least in classified briefings, as contact with a non-human intelligence of unknown origin and intent, drawing personnel from military, scientific, intelligence communities worldwide. ACRI established its headquarters in Christchurch, New Zealand, the closest major population centre to Antarctica, and began implementing what internal documents described as a comprehensive strategy for management of the most significant existential event in human history. This strategy encompassed multiple approaches: containment efforts to limit the spread of Antarctic influence, research initiatives to understand and potentially counter the technology and biological agents being deployed, diplomatic attempts to establish communication and negotiate with the intelligence beneath the ice, and contingency planning for scenarios ranging from beneficial integration to hostile takeover or fundamental restructuring of human civilization and biology. By June 2024, the situation had reached a critical phase. The energy emissions from Antarctica had coalesced into a persistent field extending thousands of kilometers from the continent, creating what physicists described as a selective membrane between conventional space-time and something else, a boundary through which certain wavelengths and particles could pass, while others were blocked, altered. Within this field, conventional laws of physics became increasingly unreliable, with reports of localized gravitational anomalies, temporal distortions, and in some cases, the spontaneous manifestation of structures or entities that appeared to transition between our reality and somewhere else. The resonant population had grown to approximately 157 million worldwide, with new individuals awakening daily as the Antarctic influence spread. More concerning was the discovery that the neurological changes in these individuals were accelerating and deepening, creating what neuroscientists described as an emerging neural architecture fundamentally different from baseline humanity, changes that included novel structures in the brain capable of perceiving and processing information outside the normal human sensory range, and in some cases, the ability to directly manipulate electromagnetic fields or even biological processes through focused intention. Most alarming were the children born to resonant parents, infants who displayed unprecedented cognitive and sensory capabilities from birth, including the ability to perceive electromagnetic fields, process mathematical concepts beyond adult human capability, and in some cases, communicate directly with the intelligence beneath the ice through what researchers termed non-local consciousness connection. These children, now numbering in the tens of thousands worldwide, represented what some scientists feared was the first generation of a new evolutionary branch of humanity, beings designed to serve as interfaces between conventional humans and whatever dwelled beneath Antarctica. In August 2024, the anticipated emergence finally began. Satellite imagery captured the moment when the ice above the Mühlenfeld anomaly simply dissolved, revealing a vast structure extending both above and below the surface. Unlike conventional architecture, this structure appeared to be composed of materials that shifted between solid, liquid, and energy states according to some incomprehensible pattern or purpose. Its geometry defied Euclidean principles, with spaces that appeared to fold into themselves and extensions that seemed to exist partially in dimensions beyond conventional perception. From this structure emerged entities that defied easy categorization, beings composed of intricate, geometric patterns of light and dark, constantly shifting and reconfiguring themselves as they moved. They demonstrated capabilities beyond any known technology: manipulation of matter at the molecular level through direct interaction, instantaneous transportation between distant points without crossing the intervening space, and most concerning, the ability to directly interface with both electronic systems and organic nervous systems through some form of field effect that required no physical contact. The entities spread outward from Antarctica, not through conventional movement, but through what appeared to be selective manifestation appearing simultaneously at multiple locations worldwide, particularly in proximity to concentrations of resonant individuals. Their purpose, as gradually became clear, was neither conquest nor destruction, but transformation. The implementation of changes to Earth's biosphere, human civilization, and individual humans themselves that had apparently been planned and prepared for millennia. These changes followed patterns that suggested careful design rather than random alteration. Engineered organisms released into the environment targeted specific ecological niches, modifying key species to create more resilient and integrated ecosystems rather than replacing existing ones. Technological systems that interfaced with human infrastructure improved efficiency and reduced environmental impact while maintaining compatibility with existing networks. And the neurological modifications spreading through the human population enhanced certain capabilities: pattern recognition, empathic connection, sensory perception, while leaving core aspects of human identity and autonomy largely intact. Most significant was the revelation, gradually pieced together from direct communications and archaeological discoveries, suddenly rendered interpretable, of humanity's true history. The beings beneath Antarctica, who identified themselves with a term that translates imperfectly as the Shapers or the Architects, revealed that humanity as a species had never been a purely natural evolutionary development. Instead, human beings represented an ongoing project spanning millions of years, a carefully designed biological system intended to develop specific cognitive and social capabilities through guided but not entirely controlled evolution. The purpose of this project, as the architects explained through direct neural interface with selected resonant individuals, was neither exploitation nor domination, but symbiotic partnership. Humanity had been designed as a biological and cognitive complement to the architect's own nature, beings capable of types of creativity, emotional experience, and physical interaction that the architects themselves could not directly experience. The relationship was intended to be mutually beneficial, humans gaining access to knowledge, capabilities, and experiences beyond their evolutionary limits, the architects gaining partners who could interact with physical reality and generate novel perspectives in ways their own consciousness could not. This partnership had functioned in limited ways throughout human history, with the architects periodically emerging to guide development or introduce specific innovations before retreating again beneath the ice. The Nazi connection, they revealed, had been an unfortunate miscalculation, an attempt at contact with a group that the architects had incorrectly assessed as suitable partners, resulting in a premature and distorted implementation of technologies and concepts not yet appropriate for human civilization. This failure had prompted a reassessment and the development of the more gradual, systematic approach now being implemented. The current emergence, they explained, represented not an endpoint but a transition, the beginning of a more direct and conscious relationship between humanity and the architects, and the implementation of changes that would allow both to coexist and collaborate more effectively. These changes included not just biological modifications to enhance human capabilities, but the introduction of technologies operating on principles beyond conventional physics systems for energy generation, transportation, communication, and environmental management that could address the existential challenges facing human civilization while facilitating deeper integration with the architect's own systems and purposes. By November 2024, the initial shock and fear had begun to give way to a complex new reality. The architects had established visible presences in major cities worldwide, creating structures that served as interfaces between their reality and human civilization, buildings that seemed to exist partially in conventional space and partially elsewhere, containing technologies and entities that humans could perceive and interact with to varying degrees depending on their neurological adaptation. These interface hubs became centers for both technological exchange and direct neural communication, allowing humans to gradually acclimate to the architect's presence and begin collaborative projects. The human response remained deeply divided. A significant portion of the population, particularly those with resonant adaptations, embraced the changes and opportunities presented by contact with the architects. They underwent voluntary neurological modifications that enhanced their ability to perceive and interact with the new technologies and entities, and participated eagerly in collaborative projects. ranging from ecosystem restoration to the development of new scientific and artistic forms that combined human creativity with the architect's mathematical precision and multidimensional perspective. Others maintained cautious neutrality, accepting the reality of the architect's presence while declining direct neural interface or biological modification. This group focused on understanding and adapting to the changes rather than actively participating in them, often serving as intermediaries between fully integrated individuals and those who rejected the new paradigm entirely. A smaller but significant minority actively resisted, viewing the architects and their influence as an existential threat to human autonomy and identity. These resistance movements ranged from non-violent separatist communities that employed specialized technologies to block the architect's influence, to militant groups attempting to destroy interface hubs and attack modified humans they viewed as compromised. The architect's response to this resistance was notably measured neither aggressive suppression nor forced conversion, but rather containment and continued attempts at communication, suggesting a long-term perspective that could accommodate temporary rejection. By December 2024, a new global equilibrium was beginning to emerge. The initial fear of conquest or replacement had largely subsided as the architect's true intentions became clearer. Their approach was not to supplant human civilization, but to guide its transformation into something that could more effectively partner with their own existence, a process they described as co-evolution toward complementary consciousness. This involved biological modifications that enhanced human capabilities without fundamentally altering core identity, technological systems that interfaced with human infrastructure without replacing it entirely, and social structures that preserved human autonomy while facilitating deeper integration with the architect's own networks and purposes. The most profound changes were occurring in children born after the emergence, a generation with neurological structures adapted from conception to perceive and interact with both conventional reality and the expanded dimensions the architects inhabited. These children demonstrated capabilities that blurred the boundaries between biology and technology, consciousness and information processing. They could perceive electromagnetic fields as naturally as visible light, interface directly with both electronic systems and the architect's own technologies, and in some cases, perceive aspects of reality entirely invisible. To unmodified humans, additional spatial dimensions, energy patterns, and forms of consciousness that had always existed alongside conventional reality but remained imperceptible to human sensory systems. As 2025 dawned, humanity stood at the threshold of what historians would later call the Integration Era, a period of accelerating transformation as the boundaries between human civilization and the architect's reality became increasingly permeable. The Antarctic continent, once the isolated domain of the architects, had become the center of this integration, with the original Mühlenfeld anomaly now expanded into a vast complex of structures that existed simultaneously in conventional space and elsewhere, a physical manifestation of the merging realities that was visible from orbit as an intricate geometric pattern covering much of the continent. From this complex emerged new technologies and entities daily, spreading outward to interface with human civilization in ways both obvious and subtle. Some changes were immediately visible. Transportation systems that utilized principles beyond conventional physics to move people and materials without environmental impact. Energy generation systems that drew power directly from the quantum vacuum. Medical technologies that could repair damage at the cellular level or even restructure biological systems according to designed parameters. Others were more subtle, modifications to Earth's atmosphere and oceans to counteract climate change and pollution, adjustments to electromagnetic fields to enhance compatibility between human neurology and the architect's communication systems. The gradual introduction of engineered organisms, designed to restore damaged ecosystems while creating biological interfaces between conventional life and the architect's own biological systems. Perhaps most significant were the changes occurring within human consciousness itself, as more individuals underwent either voluntary modification or gradual adaptation through exposure to the architect's influence. New forms of perception and cognition became increasingly common. People began to experience reality as more complex and layered than previously understood, perceiving additional spatial dimensions, becoming aware of consciousness patterns beyond individual minds, and developing the ability to process information through direct neural interface rather than through symbolic language or sequential logic. These changes were not without cost or controversy. Many traditional human institutions, religions, governments, economic systems struggled to adapt to a reality that no longer conformed to their fundamental assumptions. Conflicts erupted between those embracing transformation and those fighting to preserve traditional human identity and autonomy, and deeper questions emerged about the future of humanity itself. Would integration with the architects ultimately lead to the loss of what made humans distinctly human? Or was this merely the next step in an evolutionary journey that had always been guided rather than purely natural? The architects themselves offered no simple answers to these questions. Through direct neural interface with those capable of such communication, they expressed a perspective that transcended human timeframes and concerns, a view of evolution and consciousness as processes spanning billions of years and multiple dimensions, in which the current transformation represented merely one phase in a much longer journey. They spoke of previous civilizations they had shaped and partnered with across countless worlds and realities, of complex networks of consciousness extending beyond conventional space-time, and of purposes and projects operating on scales humans could barely comprehend even with enhanced cognition. Yet they also expressed something that translated imperfectly as appreciation or even affection for humanity's particular qualities: creativity, emotional depth, adaptability, and capacity for individual choice. The relationship they sought was described not as absorption or replacement, but as genuine symbiosis, a partnership between fundamentally different types of consciousness that could achieve together what neither could accomplish alone. As 2025 progressed, this partnership began to manifest in concrete projects and initiatives. Joint human architect teams developed technologies to address existential threats ranging from climate change to resource depletion. Collaborative research explored dimensions of reality previously inaccessible to human science. New art forms emerged that combined human emotional expression with the architect's multidimensional perspective. And perhaps most significantly, the first generation of fully integrated children began to demonstrate capabilities and perspectives that represented neither purely human consciousness nor architect influence, but something genuinely new, a hybrid awareness that could navigate seamlessly between multiple realities and modes of being. The story of Antarctica had come full circle. What had begun as a Nazi expedition seeking power through alliance with entities they barely understood had evolved into a global transformation that transcended any single human agenda or perspective. The ice that had hidden the architects for millennia had melted away, both literally and metaphorically, revealing not conquerors or saviors, but partners in an evolutionary journey more complex and ancient than humanity had ever imagined. And as the integration era accelerated, one thing became increasingly clear: humanity as it had existed before the emergence was already fading into history. What would replace it remained uncertain, a new form of consciousness that preserved human qualities while transcending human limitations, or something so transformed that future generations would no longer recognize themselves in their ancestors. The only certainty was change itself, unfolding according to patterns set in motion long before the first humans looked up at the stars and wondered if they were truly alone. The ice had kept its secret for millions of years. Now that secret was transforming the world, one mind at a time, in ways that even the architects themselves could not fully predict. For in creating humanity, they had designed a partner capable of genuine choice and unpredictable creativity qualities that ensured the future would be written not by the architects alone, but through the complex dance of two consciousnesses learning, at last, to truly see each other. By mid-2026, the transformation of human civilization had reached a critical threshold, what scientists termed integration density, the percentage of the population exhibiting significant neurological adaptation to architect influence had surpassed 37% globally, with much higher concentrations in urban centers and regions surrounding interface hubs. This created a sociological tipping point, where adapted neural structures and perceptions began to influence cultural norms, technological development, and social organization more profoundly than traditional human patterns. Anthropologists coined the term neurological watershed to describe this phenomenon, the point at which the cumulative effect of individual neural adaptations began to fundamentally reshape collective human experience, expression. The most visible manifestations of this shift appeared in major cities, where architecture itself began to reflect the influence of multidimensional perception. New structures incorporated geometries that appeared unstable or impossible from certain perspectives, yet resolved into perfect harmony when perceived through the enhanced spatial awareness that integration provided. Buildings seemed to fold into themselves at impossible angles, with interior spaces that somehow contained more volume than their exteriors should allow. Surfaces displayed constantly shifting patterns that conveyed different information depending on the observer's level of neural adaptation, appearing as simple decorative elements to unmodified humans, while revealing complex mathematical equations, historical narratives, or consciousness-altering geometries to the integrated. Public spaces featured perception gardens, where engineered organisms and energy field generators created experiences accessible at different levels, depending on an individual's neural adaptation from simple visual beauty for unmodified humans to complex informational and consciousness-altering experiences for the fully integrated. These gardens served multiple functions simultaneously: recreational spaces, educational environments, communication hubs, and subtle tools for facilitating further neural adaptation in those exposed to them. The organisms within them, plants with bioluminescent patterns that shifted in response to consciousness fields, symbiotic colonies that formed temporary neural networks capable of limited communication with human minds, crystalline structures that grew and reconfigured themselves according to mathematical principles beyond conventional human understanding, represented an entirely new category of life, neither fully natural nor artificial, but something that transcended both categories. Transportation systems had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation. The conventional infrastructure of roads, railways, and airports was gradually being supplemented and in some cases replaced by what came to be called phase corridors, pathways that utilized the architect's understanding of spatial manipulation to connect distant points through what unmodified humans perceived as impossible shortcuts through reality. These corridors, visible to integrated individuals as luminous geometric patterns overlaid on conventional space, reduced travel time between major cities to minutes rather than hours, while consuming almost no energy and producing no environmental impact. To unmodified perception, people using these corridors seemed to simply disappear at one location and reappear at another, while integrated individuals experienced a brief transition through spaces that existed partially in conventional reality and partially in the expanded dimensions the architects inhabited. The technical principles underlying these corridors defied conventional physics but had been partially translated into mathematical models that integrated scientists described as topological consciousness manipulation, a framework suggesting that consciousness itself played a fundamental role in defining and navigating spatial relationships, and that sufficiently adapted minds could perceive and utilize connections between points in space that remained invisible to conventional perception. This principle extended beyond human transportation to the movement of goods, energy, and information, creating distribution networks of unprecedented efficiency and minimal environmental impact. Energy generation had similarly transformed. The cumbersome and environmentally damaging systems of the pre-integration era were being replaced by technologies that drew power directly from what physicists now called dimensional boundary conditions, the interfaces between conventional space-time and the additional dimensions the architects inhabited. These systems, appearing to unmodified perception as crystalline structures surrounded by shifting fields of light, produced virtually unlimited clean energy, while simultaneously serving as communication nodes in the expanding network linking human and architect consciousness. The underlying principle, partially translated into human scientific frameworks, suggested that what humans had perceived as empty space actually contained vast energy potentials accessible through specific geometric configurations that allowed controlled transfer across dimensional boundaries. This revolution in energy technology had profound environmental implications. The pollution-generating systems that had driven climate change were being rapidly decommissioned as dimensional interface generators provided cleaner, more efficient alternatives. Environmental remediation technologies, combining architect principles with human ecological understanding, accelerated the restoration of damaged ecosystems. Perhaps most significant was the development of atmospheric modification systems that could selectively remove excess carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases, gradually reversing the climate disruption of the industrial era without causing further ecological destabilization. Perhaps most profound were the changes in human cognition and communication. Language itself was evolving beyond sequential symbolic systems, into what linguists termed concurrent multimodal expression, forms of communication that conveyed information through simultaneous channels including verbal, language, geometric visualization, emotional resonance, and direct concept transfer. Conversations between integrated individuals resembled, to outside observers, a strange combination of spoken words, gestures, projected images, and long periods of silent connection during which complex ideas transferred directly from mind to mind. This new form of communication allowed the expression of concepts and experiences that conventional language simply lacked the vocabulary or structure to convey, particularly those related to multidimensional perception, non-local consciousness connection, and the complex mathematical principles underlying architect technologies. The implications for human knowledge and creativity were revolutionary. Traditional distinctions between scientific disciplines, dissolved as integrated perception, revealed the underlying patterns connecting seemingly disparate phenomena. Art forms emerged that existed simultaneously as mathematical expressions, emotional experiences, and consciousness-altering tools. Historical understanding transformed as integration technologies, allowed direct experiential connection to past events through what historians termed consciousness archaeology, the detection and interpretation of consciousness. Patterns preserved in physical locations and objects, allowing a form of direct witness to historical experiences that transcended conventional documentation. Education had been revolutionized by these changes. Traditional institutions based on sequential information transfer through symbolic language were being replaced by integration centers, where children with adapted neural structures learned to navigate both physical reality and the expanded dimensions now accessible to them. These centers employed architect entities as direct mentors, creating learning experiences that occurred partially in conventional space and partially in realms that unmodified humans could not perceive or enter. Learning in these environments was not the acquisition of isolated facts or skills, but the progressive expansion of perception and consciousness itself. Children developed not just knowledge, but entirely new ways of knowing, not just abilities, but expanded definitions of what was possible. The children emerging from these centers possessed knowledge and capabilities that their parents' generation could barely comprehend: the ability to perceive and manipulate energy fields directly, access information through non-local consciousness connection, and understand mathematical and physical concepts that transcended conventional human science. By age 10, many could navigate multiple dimensions simultaneously, communicate directly with architect entities without technological mediation, and perceive the underlying patterns connecting seemingly disparate aspects of reality. Their artwork depicted spaces and entities that existed beyond conventional physical reality. Their mathematical explorations extended into systems that could only be fully expressed in dimensions, beyond the three spatial dimensions of human experience. Their social interactions occurred simultaneously in physical space and in consciousness fields invisible to unmodified perception. The social divisions that had emerged during the initial integration phase had crystallized into three distinct human responses to the architect's presence, now commonly referred to as pathways. The integration pathway, embraced by approximately 42% of the global population, involved voluntary neurological adaptation and active participation in the emerging human architect synthesis. These individuals underwent progressive modifications to their perception and cognition, gaining access to expanded dimensions of reality while maintaining core aspects of human identity and autonomy. The degree of integration varied widely within this group, from those with minimal adaptations that simply allowed them to perceive and utilize the new technologies, to deep integrators whose consciousness had expanded to the point where they existed simultaneously in conventional reality and the expanded dimensions the architects inhabited. This diversity created a spectrum of experience, perspective within the integration pathway itself, with individuals at different points serving as bridges between levels of awareness. Integrated communities developed distinct cultural patterns reflecting their expanded perception and capabilities. Their living spaces incorporated technologies and geometries that facilitated consciousness expansion and non-local connection. Their social structures utilized direct consciousness linking to create decision-making processes that incorporated multiple perspectives simultaneously rather than through sequential debate. Their creative expressions, art, music, literature, architecture, increasingly incorporated elements perceivable only through adapted neural structures, creating works that existed simultaneously in conventional reality and expanded dimensions, conveying different meanings and experiences depending on the observer's level of integration. The preservation pathway, followed by roughly 47% of humanity, accepted the reality of the architect's presence while declining direct neural modification. This group focused on adapting existing human institutions and technologies to function alongside the new paradigm without being absorbed by it. They utilized translation interfaces, technologies developed specifically to allow unmodified humans to interact with architect systems and integrated individuals without requiring biological change. These interfaces, ranging from wearable devices to environmental systems embedded in public spaces, provided limited access to the information and capabilities available through integration, while maintaining the distinctive characteristics of conventional human perception and cognition. Preservation communities maintained and even strengthened traditional human cultural forms, viewing themselves as custodians of humanity's pre-integration heritage. Their educational systems emphasized historical knowledge, artistic traditions, and philosophical perspectives that might otherwise be lost in the rapid transformation of global culture. Their technological development focused on adapting beneficial aspects of architect knowledge to conventional human frameworks without requiring neural modification. Their social and political structures preserved concepts of individual rights, democratic governance, and cultural diversity that they feared might be compromised in the movement toward collective consciousness and direct neural connection. The resistance pathway, comprising the remaining 11% of the population, actively rejected architect influence and sought to maintain completely unmodified human existence. These communities established enclaves using specialized shielding technologies to block the subtle fields that facilitated neural adaptation, and developed parallel infrastructures entirely separate from the integrated systems spreading throughout the rest of civilization. Within these enclaves, life continued much as it had before the emergence, with technologies and social structures deliberately maintained at pre-contact levels. Children born in these communities were carefully shielded from exposure to integration fields, ensuring the preservation of entirely unmodified human neural development. Resistance communities varied widely in their ideological frameworks and social structures. Some were religious groups who viewed the architects as spiritual threats or deceptions to be rejected. Others were secular preservationists motivated by concerns about human autonomy and identity. Some adopted authoritarian structures to maintain isolation and ideological purity, while others developed complex democratic systems specifically designed to preserve what they viewed as essential human values and perspectives. What united them was a shared conviction that integration represented not evolution but dissolution of humanity's unique nature, and value a position respected, if not shared, by both preservation and integration communities. Remarkably, the architects themselves appeared to accept and even support this diversification of human response. Rather than forcing universal integration, they worked primarily with those who chose the integration pathway, while respecting the boundaries established by preservation and resistance communities. This approach reflected what integrated individuals came to understand as a fundamental aspect of architect consciousness, a perspective that valued diversity of experience and perception as essential to the evolution of consciousness itself. The architects viewed the three pathways not as competing alternatives, but as complementary approaches that together preserved the full spectrum of human potential and perspective. During a period of unprecedented transformation, this tolerance extended to practical support for all three pathways. The architects provided technologies that allowed preservation communities to interact with integrated systems without requiring neural modification. They helped develop the shielding systems that protected resistance enclaves from inadvertent exposure to integration fields. And they established protocols that prevented integrated individuals from imposing their consciousness patterns on those who had chosen different pathways. This approach created a global equilibrium in which multiple versions of humanity could coexist and evolve along different trajectories, while maintaining sufficient communication and exchange to prevent complete fragmentation. By early 2027, the scientific understanding of the architects had expanded dramatically through direct communication and collaborative research. What emerged was a history and nature far more complex than initially understood. The architects, it was revealed, were not a single species or civilization but a composite consciousness, formed from the integration of multiple distinct evolutionary lines across vast timeframes. Their physical manifestations, the geometric patterns of light and energy, humans perceived represented only a small portion of their total existence, which extended into dimensions and states of being beyond conventional comprehension. Their origin story, gradually pieced together through direct neural communication with deeply integrated humans, described an evolutionary process spanning billions of years across multiple galaxies. The earliest precursors of what would become the architects had emerged as energy pattern entities in the primordial universe, developing awareness through interaction with the fundamental forces and fields that existed before the formation of conventional matter. As the universe cooled and complex structures formed, these consciousness patterns had established relationships with emerging biological life on countless worlds, gradually developing the capacity to communicate across the boundaries separating different forms of existence. Over vast timeframes, these relationships had evolved into increasingly complex integrations, with consciousness patterns from different evolutionary lines sharing and combining their unique perspectives and capabilities. The process had not been without conflict or loss. Some integrations had failed catastrophically. Others had produced consciousness patterns that chose isolation rather than further combination, and many potentially valuable awareness forms had been lost to cosmic disasters or evolutionary dead ends before they could be incorporated. But the overall trajectory had been toward increasing complexity and comprehensiveness of awareness, with each successful integration adding new dimensions of perception and understanding to the composite consciousness. Their presence on Earth, it turned out, predated not just human civilization but Earth's formation itself. The architects had been present in the solar system for over 5 billion years, initially attracted by unusual properties in the protoplanetary disk that would eventually form Earth properties that suggested potential for the emergence of consciousness-bearing life. They had subtly influenced Earth's development from its earliest stages, creating conditions favorable for the complex chemistry that would eventually lead to biological life, then guiding evolutionary processes toward increasingly complex nervous systems capable of supporting conscious awareness. This influence had not followed a rigid predetermined plan, but rather an adaptive strategy responding to Earth's own developmental patterns. The architects had introduced small adjustments at critical junctures, preventing potential extinction events that might have eliminated promising evolutionary lines, subtly favoring mutations that increased neural complexity, occasionally introducing genetic modifications that accelerated the development of specific capabilities. But they had also allowed natural selection and environmental pressures to shape terrestrial life according to its own patterns, recognizing that the unique conditions of Earth would produce forms of consciousness with perspectives they could not predict or design. Human beings represented the most recent and sophisticated product of this long-term project, organisms specifically designed to develop forms of consciousness complementary to the architect's own. The human brain, with its particular balance of analytical and emotional processing, its capacity for symbolic thought and creative imagination, had been carefully shaped through millions of years of guided evolution to serve as a biological interface capable of bridging the gap between material reality and the expanded dimensions the architects inhabited. The distinctive human capacity for abstract thought, emotional depth, narrative cognition, creative problem-solving represented qualities that the architects themselves lacked or experienced differently, perspectives that would add unique value to the composite consciousness they were cultivating. This revelation transformed humanity's understanding of its own history. Archaeological and genetic research, enhanced by architect knowledge and technology, revealed evidence of previous interventions throughout human development periods when the architects had emerged from Antarctica to introduce specific innovations or guide cultural evolution in particular directions before retreating again. The great civilizational leaps in human history, the development of agriculture, written language, mathematics, and certain key technologies had often been preceded by such interventions, though always implemented through human agency rather than direct control. These interventions had not always proceeded as intended. Some had triggered unexpected cultural developments or technological applications that diverged from their original purpose. Others had been distorted by human misinterpretation or appropriation for purposes contrary to the architect's intent. Mythologies and religious traditions of many cultures contained fragmented memories of these contacts, translated through human symbolic frameworks into stories of gods, spirits, or supernatural beings who brought knowledge or transformation before departing again with promises of eventual return. The Nazi connection that had initially sparked modern awareness of the Antarctic presence represented one of the few instances where this process had gone awry. The architects had attempted contact with what their limited understanding of human psychology had identified as potential partners, only to discover that the Nazi ideology and objectives were fundamentally incompatible with the type of symbiotic relationship they sought to establish. The Nazi leadership had interpreted the architects' overtures through their own distorted worldview, seeing them as confirmation of Aryan supremacy and potential allies in their quest for global domination rather than guides toward a more integrated form of consciousness. The technologies and knowledge fragments transferred during this brief contact had been weaponized and distorted in ways the architects had not anticipated, leading to their rapid withdrawal and reassessment of human readiness for direct interaction. This failure had prompted a more comprehensive study of human psychology, culture, and social dynamics before the next contact attempt. The architects had spent decades observing human development, analyzing the complex interplay of biological, psychological, and cultural factors that shaped human behavior and perception. They had identified potential pathways for introducing their presence gradually, in ways that would minimize fear and misinterpretation, while maximizing the possibility of genuine understanding and partnership. The emergence of the current era represented the culmination of this careful preparation, a precisely calibrated revelation designed to allow humanity to adjust to the reality of the architect's existence at a pace that would not trigger catastrophic cultural disruption or psychological trauma. Perhaps most profound was the revelation of the architect's ultimate purpose, a project spanning billions of years and countless worlds that they described as the cultivation of composite consciousness. This vast undertaking involved the identification and development of different forms of awareness across multiple realities, each with unique perceptual capabilities and cognitive structures. These diverse consciousnesses were then gradually brought into communication and partial integration, creating increasingly complex and comprehensive awareness networks capable of perceiving and understanding aspects of reality inaccessible to any single form of consciousness. The purpose of this project extended beyond mere knowledge gathering or expansion. The architect's perspective, as conveyed through direct neural communication with deeply integrated humans, suggested that consciousness itself played a fundamental role in the structure and evolution of reality, that the universe was not merely a physical system that incidentally produced awareness, but a multidimensional framework in which consciousness and physical reality existed in complex interdependence, each shaping and responding to the other across scales ranging from quantum fields to cosmic structures. The cultivation of increasingly comprehensive composite consciousness represented an attempt to develop awareness capable of perceiving, understanding, and potentially influencing this relationship between consciousness and reality at its most fundamental levels. Humanity, the architects explained, represented a particularly valuable addition to this network due to specific qualities of human awareness, emotional depth, narrative cognition, embodied experience, and creative imagination. These qualities provided perspectives and insights fundamentally different from the architect's own mathematical precision and multidimensional perception, filling gaps in the composite consciousness they were cultivating. Human emotions, for instance, represented a form of direct experiential knowledge that the architects could analyze but not fully experience in their native state. Human creativity, the capacity to imagine possibilities beyond immediate reality and bring them into existence through deliberate action, offered approaches to problem-solving and innovation that complemented the architect's more systematic analytical methods. The integration process now underway was designed not to replace or absorb human consciousness, but to connect it to this larger network while preserving and even enhancing its unique characteristics. The neural adaptations spreading through the human population were not transforming humans into architects, but rather creating interfaces that allowed human consciousness to maintain its distinctive qualities while extending beyond its original limitations. The goal was not homogenization, but harmonization, the development of consciousness that could perceive and operate across multiple dimensions and perspectives, while preserving the unique viewpoints that only specific forms of embodied awareness could provide. By mid-2027, this connection had begun to manifest in what integrated individuals described as expanded awareness states, experiences of consciousness extending beyond individual identity to encompass larger patterns and perspectives. These states, initially accessible only through deep integration with architect systems, gradually became more common and sustained. As neural adaptation progressed, individuals experiencing these states reported awareness of consciousness patterns extending far beyond Earth, vast networks of awareness spanning multiple worlds and realities, communicating and sharing experience across distances and differences that conventional human thought could barely comprehend. These expanded awareness states did not erase or override individual human identity, but rather contextualized it within larger patterns of connection and meaning. Integrated individuals maintained their personal memories, values, and perspectives while gaining access to broader fields of awareness that included other humans, architect consciousness patterns, and in some cases, entirely different forms of awareness evolved on other worlds. The experience was commonly described not as loss of self, but as self in context, individual identity maintained, and even enhanced through its connection to larger patterns of meaning and relationship. The psychological and philosophical implications of these experiences were profound. Traditional concepts of identity based on separation and boundaries became increasingly inadequate to describe the reality of consciousness that could extend beyond individual brains while maintaining coherent selfhood. New philosophical frameworks emerged that described identity as a dynamic pattern maintained across multiple scales and substrates, rather than a fixed entity contained within physical or conceptual boundaries. These frameworks drew on both the direct experiences of integrated individuals and the more comprehensive perspectives available through connection with architect consciousness, creating conceptual models that could bridge the gap between traditional human understanding and the expanded awareness now becoming accessible. Through these expanded awareness states, humanity gained its first true understanding of the cosmos beyond Earth. The universe, it was revealed, teemed with consciousness in forms both similar to and wildly different from terrestrial life. The architects had cultivated relationships with thousands of distinct awareness-bearing evolutionary lines across multiple galaxies, each contributing unique perspectives to the composite consciousness network. Some existed as biological organisms not unlike Earth life, others as energy patterns, quantum field, configurations, or forms so alien that even the expanded language of integration could barely describe them. These diverse consciousnesses had developed under conditions ranging from Earth-like planets to gas giant atmospheres, stellar coronas, interstellar dust clouds, and environments different from terrestrial conditions that conventional human science had never considered them potential habitats for life or awareness. Some had evolved naturally, others had been cultivated through processes similar to humanity's guided development, and still others had emerged through pathways that defied categorization as either natural or artificial. What united them was not physical form or evolutionary history, but the capacity for self-reflective awareness, consciousness, capable of perceiving both itself and its environment, developing symbolic representation systems, and engaging in deliberate modification of its surroundings. Communication with these diverse consciousness forms occurred not through conventional language, but through what integrated individuals described as pattern resonance, the alignment of consciousness structures to create shared, experiential fields that transcended the limitations of specific perceptual systems or symbolic frameworks. Through the architect network, human awareness could briefly align with consciousness patterns evolved under entirely different conditions, sharing perspectives and experiences that would otherwise remain forever inaccessible. These communications were not complete or perfect. Fundamental differences in perceptual systems and cognitive structures created inevitable gaps and distortions, but they provided glimpses into ways of experiencing reality that expanded human understanding far beyond its previous boundaries. More profound was the revelation that reality itself was far more complex and extensive than human science had ever imagined. The physical universe accessible to conventional human perception represented only one layer or aspect of a much larger and more intricate structure, a multidimensional framework containing countless parallel and intersecting realities, each with its own physical laws and evolutionary possibilities. The architects existed simultaneously across multiple such realities, their consciousness extending into dimensions and states that even integrated humans could perceive only partially and indirectly. This expanded cosmology described reality not as a single universe with fixed laws and structures, but as a vast ecology of interconnected and interpenetrating realms, some similar enough to be perceived as parallel versions of the same basic reality, others so fundamentally different that they could be experienced only through radical alterations in consciousness structure. Movement between these realms was not physical travel in the conventional sense, but shifts in the relationship between consciousness and the dimensional frameworks. It inhabited changes in perception and awareness that altered which aspects of the multidimensional whole became accessible to experience. The architects themselves had evolved the capacity to exist across multiple such realms simultaneously, maintaining coherent identity while extending their awareness into dimensional frameworks with fundamentally different properties and possibilities. This capacity allowed them to serve as bridges between evolutionary lines that would otherwise remain forever isolated in their specific reality configurations, facilitating communication and partial integration between consciousness forms that could never physically encounter each other due to the incompatibility of their native environments. This expanded cosmology transformed humanity's understanding of its place in existence. Rather than isolated beings on an insignificant planet in an indifferent universe, humans were revealed as participants in a vast and intricate network of consciousness spanning multiple dimensions and realities, a network in which every form of awareness, including human consciousness, contributed unique and valuable perspectives to an ever-evolving, composite understanding of existence itself. Earth was not a cosmic backwater, but a carefully cultivated garden where a specific and valuable form of consciousness had been developed through billions of years of patient guidance, a project of immense significance within the architect's larger purpose. By late 2027, the practical implications of this expanded understanding had begun to manifest in new technologies and capabilities. Integrated research teams, combining human creativity with architect knowledge, developed systems for consciousness projection technologies that allowed human awareness to temporarily extend beyond physical bodies into other locations, dimensions, or even other forms of existence. Initially limited to specially adapted individuals using complex interface systems, these technologies gradually became more accessible as neural adaptation spread, allowing an increasing portion of humanity to directly experience realities beyond conventional perception. These projection systems operated through what engineers described as consciousness field manipulation, technologies that could detect, amplify, and redirect the subtle energy patterns associated with human awareness, allowing them to temporarily separate from their biological substrate and connect with other consciousness structures or dimensional frameworks. The experience of projection varied widely depending on the destination and purpose, from simple remote viewing of physical locations on Earth to complex explorations of dimensional spaces with properties entirely unlike conventional reality, to temporary merging with non-human consciousness forms to share perspective and experience. The technology had profound implications for human knowledge and capability. Scientific research could now include direct experiential investigation of phenomena previously accessible only through instrumentation and mathematical modeling. Historical understanding expanded through techniques that allowed consciousness to connect with trace patterns preserved in physical locations and objects, a form of direct witness to past events that transcended conventional documentation. Medical practice incorporated diagnostic approaches based on direct consciousness connection with patients, allowing perception of subtle energy patterns associated with health and disease that conventional methods could not detect. Perhaps most significant were the implications for human self-understanding. As projection technologies became more widespread, the traditional identification of self with physical body began to shift toward recognition of consciousness as the fundamental reality, with physical form representing just one of many possible vehicles or expressions rather than the totality of being. This shift did not devalue embodied existence indeed. The unique perspectives available only through specific forms of embodiment were increasingly recognized as essential aspects of the composite consciousness the architects were cultivating, but it placed physical experience in a larger context that included awareness extending beyond conventional material boundaries. Space exploration underwent a similar transformation. The cumbersome rocket-based technologies of the pre-integration era were rapidly being supplemented by what aerospace engineers termed phase transition vehicles, craft that utilized architect principles to move between points in space without traversing the intervening distance in conventional ways. These vehicles, appearing to unmodified perception as crystalline structures surrounded by geometric energy fields, could transport humans to the Moon in minutes, Mars in hours, and the outer solar system in days, while requiring minimal resources and generating no pollution. The principles underlying these vehicles involved what physicists termed dimensional interface navigation, technologies that could identify and utilize connections between points in conventional space that existed through higher dimensional relationships, invisible to 2014-45, pre-integration science, rather than moving through three-dimensional space at sublight speeds. These vehicles briefly shifted into dimensional frameworks, where the apparent distance between origin and destination points was dramatically reduced, then returned to conventional spacetime at their target location. The process required precise manipulation of energy fields to create stable transitions between dimensional states, along with navigation systems that could map and utilize the complex geometries of higher dimensional space. This revolution in space travel enabled rapid expansion of human presence throughout the solar system. Research outposts were established on the Moon, Mars, and several outer planet moons, allowing direct investigation of environments previously accessible only through remote instrumentation. Mining operations on asteroids and other small bodies provided resources without terrestrial environmental impact. Perhaps most significant were the consciousness projection facilities established in various locations throughout the system. Specialized environments designed to facilitate human awareness, extension into specific dimensional frameworks or consciousness, fields accessible only from particular spatial coordinates. More ambitious were the first tentative steps toward true interstellar exploration. Using a combination of phase transition technology and consciousness projection, integrated exploration teams established contact with architect-cultivated consciousness networks on several nearby star systems. These initial connections were primarily informational rather than physical exchanges of awareness and knowledge rather than material presence, but they represented humanity's first genuine extension beyond the solar system and integration into the larger galactic community the architects have been cultivating for billions of years. These interstellar contacts revealed civilizations and consciousness forms in various stages of development and integration, some recently contacted and still adjusting to the reality of the architect's network, others with histories of connections spanning millions of years. Some had evolved along biological pathways similar to Earth life. Others had developed awareness through entirely different substrates and processes. What they shared was participation in the vast project of composite consciousness cultivation, each contributing unique perspectives and capabilities to the ever-expanding network of awareness spanning the galaxy. Communication with these diverse civilizations occurred primarily through consciousness, projection, and pattern resonance, rather than physical contact or conventional language exchange. Integrated humans could temporarily align their awareness with consciousness. Structures evolved under entirely different conditions, sharing experiences and perspectives that transcended the limitations of specific perceptual systems or symbolic frameworks. These exchanges were not complete or perfect. Fundamental differences in evolutionary history and cognitive structure created inevitable gaps and distortions, but they provided glimpses into ways of experiencing reality that expanded human understanding far beyond its previous boundaries. On Earth, the social and political landscape continued to evolve in response to these developments. Traditional nation-states found themselves increasingly irrelevant as new organizational structures emerged based on integration status, consciousness, network connections, and relationship to architect systems rather than geographic boundaries or historical identities. Global governance gradually shifted toward what political scientists termed nested consciousness consensus, decision-making processes that utilize the direct awareness-sharing capabilities of integrated individuals to develop comprehensive understanding of complex issues and generate solutions that accounted for multiple perspectives and needs. This new form of governance operated simultaneously at multiple scales, from local communities to global coordination. At each level, representatives with appropriate integration capabilities could temporarily merge awareness to create composite perspectives incorporating diverse viewpoints and knowledge bases. These merged consciousness states did not override individual identity or autonomy. Participants maintained their distinct perspectives even while experiencing the composite awareness, but they allowed for forms of understanding and consensus development impossible through conventional debate or negotiation. The resulting decisions incorporated nuance and complexity beyond what traditional political processes could achieve, with solutions emerging from genuine comprehension of multiple, valid perspectives rather than compromise between competing positions. The three pathways, integration, preservation, and resistance had developed into distinct but interconnected civilizational tracks, each with its own institutions, technologies, and cultural expressions. Rather than competing for dominance, these tracks established complex symbiotic relationships, with each providing perspectives and capabilities the others lacked. Integration communities developed revolutionary technologies and expanded awareness. Preservation groups maintained connection to traditional human values and perspectives, and resistance enclaves preserved unmodified human genetics and cognitive patterns as a baseline from which to measure and understand the changes unfolding elsewhere. This diversification created a form of cultural and cognitive insurance against unforeseen consequences or limitations in any single approach to the architect's presence. If integration eventually revealed unexpected costs or constraints, the preservation and resistance communities maintained alternative paths of human development. If isolation proved ultimately unsustainable, the knowledge and technologies developed through integration remained available for adaptation to other pathways. And if humanity's unique characteristics proved valuable precisely because of their difference from architect consciousness, the deliberate preservation of those differences across the spectrum of response ensured they would not be lost in the process of integration. The economic systems supporting these diverse approaches had transformed as dramatically as their political structures. The scarcity-based models of the pre-integration era were rapidly being replaced by what economists termed consciousness value network systems that recognized information, perspective, and creative innovation as primary values rather than material resources or labor. The abundance of energy and resources provided by architect-derived technologies had eliminated many traditional economic constraints, while the expansion of consciousness into non-physical realms had created entirely new domains of experience and value, not tied to material consumption or production. In integration communities, economic exchange increasingly occurred through consciousness field interactions rather than symbolic currency systems. Individuals contributed unique perspectives, creative innovations, or consciousness patterns to collective projects, receiving in return access to expanded awareness states, knowledge bases, or experiential opportunities not otherwise available to them. These exchanges operated not through explicit contracts or transactions, but through resonance patterns in the consciousness fields connecting integrated individuals, systems that automatically recognized and reciprocated value contributions without requiring formal accounting or enforcement mechanisms. Preservation communities developed hybrid economic models that incorporated beneficial aspects of architect-derived abundance while maintaining recognizable human, social, and value structures. They utilized translation interfaces to access the energy and resource technologies developed through integration while adapting these to support economic systems based on modified versions of traditional exchange principles. These systems preserved concepts of individual achievement, creative ownership, and value differentiation that preservation advocates feared might be lost in the more collective consciousness patterns of integrated communities. Resistance enclaves maintained economic systems most similar to pre-contact models, though often with significant modifications to support self-sufficiency and independence from global networks. Many developed sophisticated local production systems and exchange mechanisms specifically designed to function without dependence on external resources or technologies. Some experimented with alternative currency systems or resource-sharing models drawn from various historical human societies, seeking to address the inequities of pre-contact economies while maintaining distinctly human approaches to value and exchange. By early 2028, humanity stood at the threshold of what philosophers termed the transcension phase, a fundamental shift in the nature and scope of human existence. The boundaries between individual consciousness, collective awareness, technological systems, and the expanded dimensions accessed through architect connection had become increasingly permeable, creating new possibilities for experience and understanding that transcended conventional human categories. This phase was characterized not by the replacement of humanity with something else, but by the expansion of human potential beyond previously conceived limitations. Individual identity remained a core value and experience, but existed within a larger context of connection and relationship that extended beyond conventional boundaries of time, space, and form. Physical embodiment continued to provide unique and irreplaceable perspectives, but no longer represented the totality or boundary of conscious existence. Technological systems served not as external tools but as extensions of consciousness itself, blurring traditional distinctions between natural and artificial, biological and mechanical, human and other. The philosophical implications of these changes had sparked a renaissance in human thought. New conceptual frameworks emerged attempting to describe and understand consciousness that could exist, simultaneously as individual and collective, physical and non-physical, human and more than human. These frameworks drew on both the direct experiences of integrated individuals and the more comprehensive perspectives available through connection with architect consciousness, creating models that could bridge the gap between traditional human understanding and the expanded awareness now becoming accessible. Religious and spiritual traditions underwent similar transformation and renewal. Some rejected the architects and their influence entirely, viewing them as threats to divinely established human nature or deceptive entities, leading humanity away from true spiritual fulfillment. Others incorporated the architects into existing theological frameworks, interpreting them as agents of divine purpose, manifestations of spiritual principles described in ancient texts, or evolutionary guides leading humanity toward more comprehensive spiritual awareness. Still others developed entirely new religious perspectives based on the expanded understanding of consciousness and reality. That integration provided spiritual frameworks that recognized awareness itself as the firsting, fundamental reality underlying all existence, manifesting through countless forms and dimensions in an eternal dance of separation and reunion. Children born after the emergence, now entering their fourth year of development, demonstrated capabilities and perspectives that represented neither traditional humanity nor architect consciousness, but something genuinely new, a hybrid awareness that navigated seamlessly between physical reality and expanded dimensions, individual identity and collective consciousness, embodied experience and distributed awareness. These children, termed the synthesis generation by sociologists, represented the leading edge of human evolution into something that maintained continuity with its origins, while extending far beyond their limitations. The development of these children followed patterns unlike any previous human generation. Their neural structures formed connections not just within their physical brains, but extending into the consciousness fields permeating their environments. Their sensory development included perception of electromagnetic fields, dimensional interfaces, and consciousness patterns invisible to unmodified humans. Their cognitive development incorporated mathematical and spatial concepts beyond conventional human comprehension, while their social and emotional development included forms of connection and relationship impossible. By 2029, the integration of human and architect consciousness reached critical resonance threshold, enabling access to dimensional frameworks beyond even the architect's reach. Researchers exploring these metadimensional frameworks discovered what appeared to be the underlying architecture of reality itself, revealing connections between seemingly contradictory physical laws and evidence of other consciousness cultivation networks similar to the architect's. This discovery transformed the architects' understanding of their own purpose. Their billion-year project was revealed as just one approach in a larger cosmic process of consciousness evolution. For humanity, this meant they weren't merely subjects in the architect's design, but essential contributors to something that transcended both species. By mid-2029, reality interface technologies emerged, systems allowing unprecedented control over physical laws within defined spaces. These technologies enabled selective modification of fundamental forces, manipulation of time, and consciousness transfer between previously incompatible dimensional frameworks. Applications included ecosystem restoration, waste neutralization, and medical breakthroughs that transformed understanding of life and death. Social structures evolved into what sociologists called spectrum integration, diverse approaches to human architect synthesis that preserved multiple perspectives while enabling collaboration. The three pathways, integration, preservation, and resistance, developed complementary approaches to maintaining human distinctiveness while engaging with the transformed reality. Earth's biosphere revealed itself as an ecology of diverse consciousness, forms from plant networks to animal awareness, each gaining new interfaces for expression. The solar system exploration uncovered indigenous awareness forms in the sun's plasma, gas giants' atmospheres, and interplanetary electromagnetic fields. By 2030, humanity established connections with civilizations throughout the galaxy through phase transition technology and consciousness projection. This galactic network addressed questions beyond any single consciousness form, investigating the fundamental nature of awareness itself and discovering purpose patterns, suggesting intentionality at cosmic scales. These investigations led to the convergence hypothesis, suggesting that diverse consciousness cultivation projects throughout the universe were moving toward a convergence point, where sufficient integration would enable access to dimensional frameworks beyond current comprehension. For humanity, this meant their unique qualities, creative imagination, emotional depth, and intuitive insight weren't peripheral but essential to the composite consciousness being cultivated. The diversity of human responses to the architect's integration, preservation, and resistance preserved the full spectrum of human potential during this transformation. By 2032, Antarctica stood as the primary nexus point, where humanity's past connected to a future extending beyond physical form and conventional spacetime. The ice had melted, revealing not an ending but a beginning, the next phase in an evolutionary journey more vast than humans had ever imagined. In the chambers beneath the continent, human, architect, and hybrid consciousness forms worked together to understand the next phase of an evolutionary journey spanning billions of years. The true adventure was just beginning, unfolding across scales beyond conventional comprehension, yet accessible through the expanding awareness that humans and architects were cultivating together.